All right, last in the series, and I'm going to add some final thoughts at the end, because there are some things I kind of skipped over that some people might have questions about. The last in the list is the attacker, the attack fighter. It's got an A in front of it. It's usually meant to be an attacker. What does it do? Basically, you're supposed to hit multiple heavily defended targets with a relatively large payload for its size, carry penetrator bombs, that kind of stuff. It's part of a combined arms force that works with SEAD, and basically multiple aircraft are involved, and they're clearing the way for you, who are the attacker, who's the precision strike aircraft that is basically designed to provide close air support and hit really, really hard. You're also supposed to be able to linger and maneuver to basically, if the enemy is shifting their position, flexibility in changing the mission parameters, something that a big bomber can't do. That's what an attacker is supposed to do. Doctrine, close air support, coordinated from the ground, also strikes against maneuvering enemy formations from overhead, also strikes against enemy ships. Now, rather than getting into more of how that works, I'm going to actually just tell you about the aircraft that do this really well, and then you'll kind of explain why they're attackers. First two I'm going to talk about is basically the Navy's retired one. The first one is the A6E Intruder. That's basically a subsonic attack aircraft with a decent payload, takes off from a carrier, and it could be used in anti-ship, it could be used in anti-sub, it could be used in basically coastal strike. The F-18s and the F-14s particularly clear the airspace, and they clear the way of threats so that the A6s can come in and intrude and drop their payload. They're not particularly fast, they're maneuverable, but maneuverable enough, and their payload is decent. They're part of the combined arms force. They retired it. They've replaced it with the F-35C. Go back to my multi-role video if you want to figure out kind of what I think about that. Same for the next aircraft. AV-8B Harrier, the Harrier II. That's the one the Marines use as an attack aircraft. It's a great close air support aircraft that actually can deal with enemy fighters and whatnot. The A6, not so much. Doesn't have amazing linger time, but it's got good linger time. It's subsonic. It's got a really decent payload. It's got a really good gun. The Marines love it. It's really flexible, and they use it in Iraq really effectively, and you can use it for anti-ship. It basically takes the concept of a small carrier that would normally just be a helicopter carrier and turns it into something that's much more of a threat because you've got Harriers, you've got jump jets. Awesome aircraft. VTOL, do I think the F-35B replaces it? No, I don't at all. Go back to my multi-role video where I talk about that. We need a replacement for that, by the way. The king of attack aircraft, the A-10 Thunderbolt. A-10C is specifically the one that the Air Force is using now. They're trying to retire it, but they can't. In fact, it's been doing more things. It's been launching off of carriers in the Gulf. It was launching off of basically unpaved runways, and National Guard basically were landing on strips of dirt secured by U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan. It's a really, really good plane. It's a titanium bathtub with a gigantic Gatling cannon and some wings on it and some engines raised up. Survivability of the A-10 is unbelievable. If you see some footage of aircraft coming back from particularly the first Gulf War, where they started taking flak fire and surface-to-air missile fire, and the guy comes in, he goes, man, I'm cooked, you know, and engine's out, this and this is going on, and then he lands and he gets out and he looks at the aircraft and it looks like a piece of Swiss cheese or a tin can that somebody took a shotgun to, but it still flew. And none of the titanium bathtub the pilot was sitting in protected him. And the fact that the engines are raised up on the basically rear wings meant that the plane kept flying. It's a tough son of a bitch. And they haven't really found an airframe that does what it does as cheaply, as effectively, as survivable, or something that can deliver that GAU-8 30mm gun on it. The Burt. The thing, basically the A-10s were deployed and they would provide close air support to people on the ground who needed it. Everybody loves the A-10 when the A-10 shows up because the enemy runs like hell because that gun is terrifying. And then also they were able to basically get information from the AWACS and the J-Stars that enemy armor is maneuvering. And what did the A-10 do? Well, there's a thing they called the Highway of Death in the first Iraq War, and that was pretty much the A-10. Destroys enemy formations. Destroys enemy fortifications, destroys enemy armor, shoots down helicopters too. There's actually some air-to-air kills by the A-10 back in the Gulf War, and it pretty much was they were shooting down helicopters. subsonic. It's designed to maneuver and outmaneuver threats, but what it's not designed to do is dogfight. Doesn't. Flies low, stays under the radar, points that big gun at things and makes them evaporate. That's what the A-10 does. So, what do we do with attack aircraft moving forward? Well, the Navy doesn't have an attack aircraft. Go back to my F-35C video. Or should I say, the multi-role video where I talked about the F-35C. Navy doesn't have one. But they've been using the A-10 as is off of carrier decks in the Gulf. I think they should get their own dedicated version of the A-10. That's what I think. I think there should be an A-10N. Maybe it's a two-seater. Maybe it's got to have the foldable wings. Maybe some changes, improvements to make it better suited for naval operations. Obviously, it's got to have the tail hook and everything. Even if it basically turns it from a short takeoff aircraft to a catapult-assisted aircraft, I think it's just too good of a platform, and the Navy's using it way too well. Particularly special operations have been using it way too well to just overlook it. I think that's the solution. As for the Harrier, replacing the Harrier, like I had said, the F-35B doesn't do that. I'm not so sure if the next generation of attack helicopters, like either ones with a tilt rotor or the X-2s with like the double and like a pusher fan on the back, I don't think that's going to be able to do exactly what the Harrier does. It might supplement it, though, and that might be why we don't see essentially a jump jet, because something else like that is replacing it. I'd like to see something like, the Orca from Command & Conquer, where it's basically like a helicopter, but it's got, basically rotating jump jets, and it can fast and deliver missiles and payload and whatnot. Something that does what the Harrier does, maybe like a Harrier 3. I don't know about that so much. Just because the VTOL technology has changed a lot. The Harrier is notoriously dangerous to train and fly with. We have lost them. They do crash. Every once in a while we lose somebody to a Harrier just because it's a Widowmaker. It really is. I don't know what they would. I don't know if anybody's coming. I haven't seen any platforms that would replace that, where it's like, hey, they designed something really cool. They can replace the Harrier. Let's do it. Nobody's really come up with anything that's as good as the Harrier is, and I think we should. I think we should probably invest and look and find out, okay, what is the role the Harrier has been doing, and we need an aircraft that does all of those things better, and it can still launch from a carrier, and it's still about the similar operating cost, and hopefully is safer. So that's an attack aircraft. That's my explanation. I don't think the Air Force should change the A-10. Maybe they should have they're going to introduce, a bomber that's like a light bomber or something that's like stealthy, fine, but the A-10, it's a king of close air support. Do you need air supremacy? It helps a lot, because, the A-10 can fly low, but, it'd be nice if you didn't have to worry about getting bounced by enemy fighters. But in terms of like close air support, when you have air superiority, an A-10 being in the theater, that is such a huge morale boost and capability boost to the ground forces. I don't see the A-10 going anywhere. It's just too good of an airframe, and I haven't seen anything proposed by any nation that does anything near as well in terms of the role of an attack aircraft, dedicated attack Air Force aircraft, than the A-10 does. It's the best. So that's attack aircraft. Now, final thoughts. I'm going to mention electronic warfare aircraft, stuff like the EA-6B Prowler, which is a variant of the A-6, but it was specifically for electronic warfare. It's got 4 pilots in it. It's pretty crazy. The EF-111 Raven, I believe that's a 2-pilot. Basically, I think they actually sit side by side, if I remember correctly. It was an unarmed electronic warfare variant of the F-111. Those are good. They were very good. They served for a while. They phased them out, and part of it is because electronic warfare has changed. The ranges in which you can perform electronic warfare are a lot higher. The methods in which you do it, and also the equipment, like electronic warfare pods, are much, much smaller. Seed aircraft can do a lot of what the electronic warfare aircraft could do. Is having a dedicated fighter with electronic warfare relevant still? I don't know. I tend to think not. Because I think it's more of like I think multi-role aircraft are probably going to be able to do that just fine. It seems like the F-35 has pretty much taken over the electronic warfare role. But I wanted to mention those because that is technically a type of fighter, but it's been phased out for the most part. And I differentiate it from Seed, because I think SEAD also has the ability to take out enemy air defenses, as opposed to electronic warfare, which is just basically a big bright spotlight that jams the enemy. Usually you only have one of those in the formation, but you only have multiple SEAD aircraft because there's a lot of enemy air defenses. The second type I'm skipping, which I don't think is technically a fighter, but I think because they came from basically the old World War II fighters in basically design, COIN, counterinsurgency. Real quick, what is a counterinsurgency aircraft? It's a lightweight, cheap to operate aircraft that flies subsonically, usually propeller-driven. The best ones are usually propeller-driven. Has a half-decent payload, decent linger time, and can coordinate with ground forces pretty easily, often over the radio, and is not flying so fast that they can't look out the window and figure out what's going on. We had multiple of those aircraft. We had a lot that we developed during Vietnam, some of them not so survivable, some very good. The top two were probably the OV-10 Bronco and the OV-1 Mohawk. Mohawk was the Navy's one. I've heard mixed things about it, whether, it seems like it's a very practical aircraft. The Israelis used it for a while after we retired them. It was a very capable aircraft on paper. I heard that it was kind of a crash-o-matic. I don't know. I'm not a pilot. I don't know. That's been phased out. So the Navy doesn't have a COIN aircraft. I think they should. The Viper, the AH-1Z Viper, does a lot of the roles that the Mohawk used to do. Because the attack helicopters are so much more capable, and that's kind of like the Army, who used to have the Bronco. They've got the Apache E, the Guardian. That has basically at least the old capabilities of what the Bronco had. Now, they still found in places like Afghanistan that basically a COIN aircraft is actually really useful, and that's why the Afghan Army basically bought them Super Tucanos, which is a Brazilian close air attack aircraft. That's a decent plane. I don't think it's the right choice for the United States. I think the Bronco, they called it the Bronco X. It was like a company in Florida that basically upgraded the Bronco to modern avionics. That's good, because apparently they brought them out to test them in, I think, Iraq for a little while, like back in the, I think it was the mid-2000s. And they apparently performed okay, but it takes a lot of money to bring stuff out of storage and restart a program like that. But COIN, basically, it's a light aircraft that can linger for a while and is just propeller driven and be easy to coordinate close air support. So basically, somebody without a laser designator can call on the radio and say, "Hey, do you see the building here with the square roof? Like, I'm on top of it, and the bad guys are across the street." Now, if you're in like an F-16 or F-35, you don't have a prayer of seeing what's going on. But if you're in a COIN aircraft, yeah, you can. You actually just tilt your wing, you look down, you can see. You usually got another guy who's operating the weapons, who's got eyes. With modern sensors, you can put a FLIR underneath and do all kinds of cool things. So we don't have one. Will the helicopters fill the role? I tend to think no, because then we would have sold the Afghans helicopters. But we didn't. We sold them. Well, we didn't sell it to them. We literally gave it to them. We gave them Super Tucanos. So. The A-29 is what the Air Force designated that. So that's basically the last two side ones. They're not technically fighter. Well, I should say you could argue they're technically fighters, but they really don't fall into the main categories because they do something like kind of more distinct. And the platforms are usually built completely different in terms of purpose, especially like electronic warfare. You're usually completely unarmed. So that's that. That's the type of aircraft, fighter aircraft. I hope you learned something. I hope if you're a writer or a game designer that helped you a little bit. And I'm definitely interested in seeing the comments about what you guys think is the best of whatever. I'm sure there's aircraft I'm unaware of that, maybe we should be looking into. But that's that.